The man who was never on the payroll. There's a man in a photograph I took in the summer of 1929, and he never worked there. I want to be careful how I say that, because the easy way to say it is wrong. I don't mean I forgot his name. I don't mean the company let him go and scratched him out of the book afterward. I mean the company had no record of him. The foreman counted his crew that morning the way he counted them every morning with his finger, out loud, and the count came out right without him. The men in the picture told me later there were 11 of them on that step, and there were 11 of them. And then I developed the plate, and there were 12. He's standing toward the back, a little to the right, behind the tall fellow with the bad arm. And the part I still can't make my peace with, the part that's the reason you're sitting here with that machine running, is that the first time I printed him he was soft, out of focus almost, the kind of thing you'd blame on a man moving when the shutter's slow. But every time I printed that negative after, he came up sharper. Same negative, same enlarger, same paper out of the same box, and he kept getting clearer, like he was walking toward the camera through the picture, taking years to do it. You asked me to start at the beginning. I don't think there is one, not a clean one, but I'll tell it the way it came to me, and you can sort the order out later. I'm an old man. Things don't line up for me the way they used to. I was a newspaper photographer. That's not as grand as it sounds now. In those years, there were dozens of us riding the lines through the mountains, working for papers and for syndicates and sometimes for the coal companies themselves, who liked a nice picture of a new tipple or a clean schoolhouse to put in front of people who'd never come look. I worked the New River country mostly. West Virginia. The Chesapeake in Ohio ran right down through the gorge, and the towns hung off that railroad like wash off a line, because there wasn't any other way in or out of half of them. You came by train or you didn't come. I had a Graflex, the big one, and a satchel of holders and a smaller folding camera for when I had to move quick. I want you to understand what that work actually was, because people hear photographer and they picture a man pointing and the picture happening. It wasn't like that. Every exposure was a decision you couldn't take back, and you made it half blind. You loaded your film holders in the dark, in a changing bag if you were on the move, by feel, and if you fumbled a sheet, you'd wasted money you didn't have. You guessed your exposure off the back of your neck, off how the light felt, because the meters then weren't worth carrying. You shot, and then you waited, sometimes days, sometimes a week, if you were riding and couldn't get to a darkroom. The picture wasn't real until you were standing over the tray in the red light watching it come up out of the paper, and by then whatever was in front of you was long gone. You couldn't go back and try again. The day was over. The men had gone home. I'm telling you that so you'll understand why I trusted it. The whole trade was built on the idea that the plate doesn't lie. People lie. Your eyes lie in bad light at the end of a long day. But the film sat there in the holder and took down exactly what the lens gave it, and chemistry brought it back exactly the way the light had left it. And that was the one fixed thing in a life that didn't have many. You could fight with a man about what he said. You couldn't fight with the photograph. That was the whole reason the work mattered. I'm telling you that so you'll understand what it did to me later, when the photograph started being the thing that lied. You asked before how I lived. I lived on trains mostly in those years. That's the honest answer. A man doesn't think of it as a life at the time. He thinks of it as the gap between jobs, but the gap was most of it. I knew the C&O timetable better than I knew scripture. I knew which agents would let you sleep on a bench in the depot if the next train wasn't till morning, and which ones would put you out in the cold for the principle of it. I carried the Graflex in a case I'd had a man line with felt, because the thing was heavy, and the mountains are nothing but jolts. And I carried the holders in a satchel against my chest, never in the rack, never out of my own hands, because film is a fragile thing, and a dropped holder is a day's work gone. You learn to sleep sitting up with your arms around your equipment like it's a child. I can still feel the weight of that satchel on my chest. Some nights I wake up reaching for it, and it's been 40 years gone, the smell of those trains, Coal again, of course, you couldn't get away from it. But also hot oil and wet wool and the particular sourness of a car full of men who've been riding a long time. And the sound, that's the thing my body remembers best. The rail joints going under you, that steady knock, and the way it'd change pitch on a trestle, go hollow, because for a few seconds there was nothing under you but the river a long way down. I'd look out and there'd be the gorge, the cliffs going up and up till the sky was just a strip, and little towns down there in the bottom of it with their lights coming on. And you'd think, how does anybody live way down in there? And then the train would pull in and you'd get off and you'd be one of them for 3 days. Thurmond, that's where it started. If it started anywhere, you can still go there. That surprises people. It's mostly empty now, a few buildings along the river and the tracks. But in 1929, it was a real town. Busy, more money moving through it than you'd believe to look at it today. No streets to speak of. The depot, the bank, the hotel, the stores, all of it strung along between the rail line and the cliff, because there wasn't room for anything else. The mountains came straight down to the water there. You'd stand on the platform and feel like the whole place had been wedged into a crack and might get squeezed back out. I came in to do a job for the company. Routine. They wanted pictures of the operation, the men, the store, the works, the kind of thing they'd send up to Cincinnati to show the town was thriving. I'd done 100 jobs like it. You photograph the new equipment, you photograph some clean-faced children if there's a school, and you photograph the men, because nothing sells a coal town like a row of men who look proud and fed. I remember the smell of the place better than I remember any single person in it. Coal, of course. Coal dust gets into everything, your food, your bedding, the back of your throat, and after a day you stop smelling it, and then you smell it again at night. But under the coal there was the river, which had its own smell, wet stone and something green, and the creosote off the ties, and somewhere a bakery or a kitchen that I never found but kept catching on the air. I can call that up right now, sitting here. I couldn't tell you the foreman's name to save my life. I think it was August. It was hot anyway, the kind of wet mountain heat that lies in a gorge and doesn't move. I had a devil of a time with the light because the cliff cut the sun off early on one side and the river threw it back hard on the other. I remember being more worried about the light than about anything else, which is funny now. The picture that matters, I took outside the company store. The crew came up from the works to have it made, still in their dirt, which is what the company wanted, the working look. They lined up on the steps and against the wall of the store. I set the Graflex up on the tripod and got under the cloth and I made them hold while I got the focus, and a man's patience for holding still is about 4 seconds. So I worked fast. I made 2 exposures. You always made 2 if the film allowed. One for the holder, one for the saint that watches over photographers, my old partner used to say. 11 men. I'd swear to that today, and I'd have sworn to it then. I counted them through the ground glass because the company always wanted to know how many men were in the picture for the caption, and I counted 11. The foreman counted 11 for his own reasons. The men knew how many of them there were because they worked together every day of their lives. I didn't develop it there. I almost never did on a moving job. I carried the holders on with me up the line, and I didn't get to a dark room until I was back in the office days later. So the first I saw of the extra man was a week after, in a town a long way off, in red light, alone. You asked me how I reacted. The truth is not very dramatic. I thought I'd had a light leak or a double exposure, 2 sheets stacked, that kind of thing. The kind of mistake you'd be ashamed of but not afraid of. There was an extra figure in the back of the frame, soft, and my first feeling wasn't fear, it was irritation, because I thought I'd ruined a paid job and would have to explain it. I checked the other exposure, the saint's copy, and he was in that one too, in the same spot, just as soft. That stopped the light leak idea, because a leak wouldn't put the same man in the same place on 2 different sheets. But I still wasn't afraid. I was a craftsman with a problem. I figured I'd misremembered the count. 12, not 11. Easy thing to get wrong with men in dark clothes against a dark wall, all of them tired, half of them looking the same way they all do at the end of a shift. So I printed the good one, and I sent the company their pictures, and I wrote 11 men in the caption because that's what my notes said, and I didn't think about it again for a while. That's the part people don't believe, that I didn't think about it. But that's how it really goes. You don't recognize the first day of a thing. You only ever recognize it later, looking back, and by then you've made it neater than it was. The reason I printed it again was money. The company liked the picture and wanted more copies, and a magazine up north wanted one too, for a piece they were doing on the coal fields, so I went back to the negative 2 or 3 weeks on and ran a fresh batch. And the man was sharper. Now, I have spent the rest of my life trying to think of an honest way that could happen, and I want to give you the honest ways first, because I'm not a foolish man, and I don't want you thinking I am. A negative is a negative. The information on it is fixed. Silver gone dark where the light hit it. When you print, you're just shining a lamp through it onto paper. You can make a print lighter or darker. You can hold back a corner with your hand. You can do all manner of things to change how it looks. So the first thing I thought was that I'd printed him better by accident the second time. Burned that part of the frame a little, brought him up. That's a real thing that happens. But it wasn't that. And I knew it wasn't because I looked at the negative itself, up to the light, with a loupe, the way I'd looked at 10,000 negatives. And there was more of him in the negative, not in the print, in the negative. Detail in his face that hadn't been there, the line of a collar. The first time I'd looked, he was a smear with the suggestion of a head. Now there was a man there, with a face turned a little away, and a hat and the front of a jacket, and he had become the kind of thing you could describe to a stranger. A negative doesn't ripen. That's the thing. Once it's fixed and washed, it's done. It can fade over years if you do it wrong, get fainter, but it does not gain. It cannot put detail into itself that the lens didn't give it. There is no chemistry for that. I knew every chemistry there was. There wasn't one for that. I'll tell you what I did, because it's the kind of thing that tells you who I was then. I didn't tell anybody. I cleaned my equipment. I checked my chemicals. I thought maybe I was getting sick, maybe my eyes, and I had a fellow I knew look at the negative without telling him what to look for. And he said, "Who's the one in back?" He came out nice. And I said, "Which one?" And he pointed straight at the man. And that was the first time my stomach went, because somebody else could see him too. He was in the thing now. He was real to the silver into another man's eyes. He just hadn't been on the steps. I wrote to the foreman at Thurmond. That's the letter I mentioned. I wrote it as a professional matter, very dry. I said I was double-checking my caption. Could he confirm the names and number of the men in the company store photograph from my records? And the letter that came back is, like I said, a good part of why I'm telling you any of this at all. He sent me the names, 11 names. He'd taken the trouble to walk it back. You could tell. He'd asked the men. 11. And then at the bottom he'd written in a different, slower hand, like he'd thought about whether to put it down. There is no 12th man here. Do not print one. Just that. Do not print one. Like I'd been threatening to invent somebody. Like it was my doing. I didn't understand that line for a long time. Now I think he knew more than he was going to put in a letter to a stranger. I think "do not print one" was the kindest, most frightened thing he knew how to write to a man he'd never met. You'd think that would be the moment I quit, or ran, or did something sensible. It wasn't. I want to be truthful with you about that because I think the truthfulness is the only thing this story's good for. I didn't run. I got stubborn. I'd built my whole self on the idea that the photograph was the truth, and here was a photograph telling me something that couldn't be true, and rather than let go of the photograph, I went looking for the truth to catch up to it. That's a kind of pride that doesn't look like pride. It looks like diligence. It feels like doing your job. So I went back to work, and I watched. The next thing happened up the line at Hawk's Nest. That name might mean something to you. It does to a lot of people now, for reasons that came later, after my time there, reasons I had nothing to do with and won't pretend to. In 1929, it was just another place along the river, the gorge narrowing down, the cliffs and the white water, a few buildings, men and families the way they were everywhere in that country. I had a job near there, a different company, different men, nothing to do with Thurmond. Different camera, even. I'd had the Graflex's shutter worked on and was using the folding camera for some of it. Different film stock entirely, a different box, a different lot number. I'm telling you all that because it matters. If it had only ever been the one negative, one bad plate, I could have lived. A man can carry one impossible thing. He calls it a fluke and he sleeps. But I made a picture of a family on a porch near Hawk's Nest, a woman and her people, and when I developed it, there was someone in the doorway behind them. Soft, at first. Back in the dark of the doorway where you'd expect a person not to register at all. No light on them. And over the next prints he came forward, the same way, getting himself made out of the grain a little more each time, until you could see he had a hat and a jacket, and his face was turned a little away, the same way, the same standing back and to the side, the same patience about it. I don't know how to make you feel what that did to me, finding the same patience in a different town, in a different camera, on a different film, because the chemicals and the glass and the silver were all that I had ever trusted, and the trouble was not in any one of them. It was loose, it was moving through them, it was in the river country itself, riding the line the way I wrote it. That's when I stopped sleeping right. The local people. You'd want to know about them, and I can tell you a little, but less than you'd hope, because they didn't make it easy, and now I understand why. They didn't want their pictures made. Not all of them, but enough that I noticed, because everywhere else I'd ever worked, people wanted it. A photograph was a thing you couldn't ordinarily have, a thing that proved you'd been alive and a certain way at a certain time. And people would put on their good clothes for it, and stand stiff as fence posts, and treasure the result. But up and down that part of the river, people would shake their heads and turn away. An old woman, I remember, in a house where I'd been let in to photograph something else, had a framed picture on the wall, and when she saw me notice it, she got up and turned it to face the wall. And she didn't explain, and I didn't ask, because there are looks a person gives you that tell you a question would be an unkindness. A man told me, not direct, the way they told you things there, around the side. He said you ought to be careful what you bring back out of a picture. He said it like he was talking about the weather. I said, what do you mean, bring back out of it? And he looked at me a while and decided I either didn't know or was pretending. And either way, he wasn't going to be the one to say it plain. And he changed the subject to the price of something. They knew. Some of them knew. They'd grown up knowing it the way you grow up knowing which stretch of river will drown you, not as a story, just as a fact about where you live. And they'd decided the safe thing was to keep out of the silver altogether, not to be in it, not to be where it could find them and decide to keep them or to add to them. I went back and dug out my old work after that. Years of it, boxes of negatives. I made myself look. And here's where I have to be honest in a way that costs me something, because I want to tell you they were all full of him, that I found him in everything. But the truth is murkier than that, and the murk is the worst part. In some of the old pictures there was a shape I hadn't noticed before. A figure too far back, in a doorway, at the edge of a crowd that I had no memory of and couldn't account for. But I'm an honest man, and I have to allow that I take a great many photographs, and I do not remember every soul who wanders into the back of every frame. A street is full of people. I didn't pose them all. So was he always there and I never looked, or did he come into them later, the way he came forward in the new ones? I don't know. I will never know. That not knowing is what I've actually had to live with. Not a monster, a doubt. A doubt about every photograph I ever took, which is to say a doubt about the one thing I'd built my life to be sure of. I'd half talked myself into living with it. A man can live with a doubt. People do, all the time, about bigger things than this. And I might have, except for the letter from the woman. This is the part I think about most, if I'm honest, more than the men on the steps even, and I'll tell you why in a minute. A while back, before any of this had a shape to it, I'd done a portrait job in one of the river towns. A woman and her 2 girls, a nice one, made in their front room by the window light, because that's the softest light there is, and the cheapest, being free. It was a good picture. I was proud of it. It ran too, not as anything, just in with a piece about the town, the kind of thing that fills a column. So it was out, printed, in the world. However many copies the paper ran, all of them the same, all of them gone out to porches and parlors and the bottoms of drawers. You can't call a thing like that back. That matters for what comes next. It was already everywhere a small thing can be. And one day a letter found its way to me through the paper, from the woman. And it was a polite letter, an embarrassed letter, the kind a person writes when they think they might be a fool, but the thing won't leave them alone. She said she'd had the picture framed and on the wall a good while, and she'd looked at it the way you look at a thing on your own wall, which is to say not at all, for months. And then one evening she'd been sitting with it, and she'd noticed her shadow, her own shadow, on the wall behind her in the picture, and it fell the wrong way. I read that and I didn't understand it, and then I went and got my copy, because I keep copies, and I looked, and she was right. Let me tell you what that means, so you feel it the way I felt it. I made that picture by the window. The light came in from her left. So every shadow in that room, every shadow of every person and every chair and the vase on the sill, all of them fall to the right, away from the window, because that is what light does. It is the one thing in this world that has never once been undecided about which way to go. And her shadow, the woman's, on the wall behind her, fell to the left, toward the window, toward the light, as if there were another light, behind her, in the room where there was no light and no lamp and no door, throwing her shadow back the other way, just hers. The girls' shadows were right, the chairs were right, hers was wrong, and it had always been wrong, in every copy, in the one on her wall and the one in my hand, and every one the paper ever ran, and not one living soul had seen it. Not her for months, not me, and I made the thing. I'd printed that picture more times than I could count and held it to the light, and checked it the way I checked everything, and I had never once seen that a woman's shadow was falling toward the lamp that wasn't there. You asked me once what scared me worst out of all of it. People expect me to say the man, the 12th man, the face coming forward. It wasn't. It was her shadow. Because the man, at least, was in the back, and the dark, where you don't look hard. You could tell yourself a story about not noticing the man, but the shadow was the plainest thing in the picture, dead center, on a white wall, and it had been wrong the whole time, and the wrongness had been invisible. And I understood, sitting there with it, that I had no idea what was in my photographs. None. I'd thought a photograph was a thing you could look at and know. And here was proof, in my own hand, in a picture I'd made and loved and printed and sent out into 100 homes, that a thing could be staring out of the silver as plain as day, and you would simply not see it, for months, for years, until one quiet evening it decided to let you. The trouble wasn't that strange things were getting into my pictures. The trouble was I could no longer trust that I knew what was already in them. Every photograph I'd ever taken, everyone out there on every wall, might have something in it falling the wrong way, and I'd never know which, and neither would the people who'd hung them up and loved them. And that one was out, framed, on a wall, in a home with 2 little girls in it. I couldn't burn that one. I couldn't burn the 100 others the paper had run. They were past me. That's the thing that started turning the doubt into a kind of fear that had a direction to it, because up till then the trouble had been in my hands, in my holders, in my dark. Now I understood it was already loose, in places I'd sent it myself, with my own name under it years ago, before I'd known to be afraid. I never wrote the woman back. I've been ashamed of that for 40 years. I didn't know what a man could possibly say. The editor wanted to run him. I should have seen that coming. It was a striking picture, the Thurmond one, the men on the steps, all that grit and weariness, and the strange, clear man at the back that nobody could name. By then I'd made the mistake of mentioning the puzzle to a man at the paper, just as a curiosity, a who is this, and of course to a newspaperman that's not a curiosity, that's a story. The mystery man of the coal fields, he wanted to print it big and ask the readers, does anyone know this fellow? Write in. People love that, a face nobody can place. It would have sold, and I want you to sit with the position I was in, because this is the real thing the whole story is about. The rest is just weather. I had spent my life believing that the job was to bring the truth back and put it in front of people. That a photograph was a public thing, a piece of proof, and that holding it back was a kind of lie. Everything I was raised into as a craftsman said, print it. It's true. It happened to the film. The people have a right to it. Who are you to decide what they don't get to see? But by then, I had the foreman's letter in a drawer. Do not print one. And I had a worse thing, which I'll get to, that it started to make me think that printing was not just showing a thing but doing a thing. That the picture wasn't a window. That it was a door, and it didn't only swing one way. I told the editor no, and I had to lie to him to make the no stick. And the way that went is one of the few conversations from those years I can still hear word for word. He had the print on his desk, the Thurmond one, and he had his thumb on it, on the back row, on the man, and he was happy the way an editor gets happy, which is a thing that's got nothing to do with whether a thing is good and everything to do with whether it'll move papers. He said, who is he? I said I didn't know. He said, that's the point. That's the whole point. Nobody knows. We run it big. We say, do you know this man? Write to us. And every fool in 3 counties writes in claiming it's their dead uncle, and we run their letters for a month. He was already laying it out on the page in his head. I could see it. He said it'd be the best thing I'd ever shot. And I stood there and I had about 2 seconds to decide what kind of man I was going to be. And I'll tell you, every year of my training said let him run it. It's true. It happened to the film. You are a witness, and your job is to witness out loud. And I opened my mouth to tell him the truth, that the man hadn't been on the steps, that the foreman counted 11, that he'd come forward out of the grain print by print like he was wading up out of deep water, and I heard how that would sound said out loud in a newspaper office in daylight. And I knew that if I said it, he'd run the picture for certain, because a haunted picture sells 10 times what a merely strange one does, and the truth would be the very thing that put the man on 100,000 doorsteps. The truth would do the harm. Do you understand what a thing that is for a man like me to stand there and work out that the truth was the dangerous part? So I lied. I said the negative was bad. I said it was a stain in the emulsion, a chemical fault, that I'd seen it before in that batch of film, and it threw up shapes that looked like figures and weren't, and that if he ran it, some other photographer would spot the fault and we'd both look like fools who didn't know our trade. That last part was what got him, the looking like fools. Editors will swallow a great deal before they'll risk that. He looked at it again, and he sort of grunted, and he said it was a shame, it was a hell of a picture, and he pushed it across the desk back to me, and that was that. 100,000 doorsteps that didn't get him, because I'd stood in a sunny office and sworn that the truest photograph I ever took was a smear of bad chemistry. I went back to my room and I was sick to my stomach, and not over the lie. I told lies. Everybody has. It was the other thing. For the whole of my life I had believed, the way you believe a thing without ever once saying it, that a true thing should be shown, that showing it was the good, that hiding a true thing was the sin. And I just stood there and decided, on my own, with nobody to tell me I was right, that this true thing should not be shown, that some proof should stay in the dark. I didn't have a name for the kind of man that made me. I still don't. The closest I've ever come is that I stopped being a witness that day and started being something else, A keeper, maybe. A man who decides what the world can stand to see. Nobody gave me that job. I just took it, alone, in a rented room, and I've never been able to give it back. Now the worst thing. The thing that turned it from a puzzle I couldn't solve into a choice I couldn't get out from under. There was a small place, I'll not say the name, a wide spot on the line with a store and a church and not much else, where I'd done a job earlier, before any of this, and a picture of mine from there had run in a paper. A street scene, ordinary, with the church in it, and some people, and he was in it. I didn't know that when it ran. I found it after, going back through, and there he was, in the doorway of the church, far back, the way he was, turned a little away. And word came up the line, the way word did, slow and sideways, that the place had had a bad season. I want to be careful here because this is exactly where a man like me, telling a story like this, wants to reach for something terrible and certain. And I won't, because it wasn't certain. And the not being certain is the whole horror of it. People got sick, some left. A family that had been there as long as anybody just wasn't there one spring. The church closed. None of it was the kind of thing that doesn't happen in those mountains all the time, because all of it happened in those mountains all the time. Sickness, leaving, dying, a town thinning out till it's a name on an old map. That was ordinary. That's the cruelty of it. There was nothing about what happened there that you could point at and say, that's not natural. That's the thing in the photograph. It was all completely natural. It was the most natural thing in the world. And I could not stop thinking that my picture had run, with him in it, and then it had happened. You can't prove that. You understand. You can't ever prove it in either direction. That's not a gap in the story that more looking would close. That's the shape of the thing. I had a suspicion that could never become a fact and could never become nothing. It just sat there. Maybe my picture had carried him into that town the way you carry a sickness on your hands without knowing, shaking everyone you meet. Or maybe a hard place had a hard year, the way hard places do, and a frightened man with a strange photograph stitched the two together, because the human animal cannot abide a thing that means nothing. Both of those are completely possible. They are still both completely possible sitting here all these years on. I have not moved 1 inch closer to knowing. I have only gotten older holding both of them at once. I got afraid to develop my film. That's a strange thing for a photographer to say, like a baker afraid of the oven. But it's the plain truth, and it lasted the rest of my working life. The film holders would pile up, I'd shoot a job, and then I wouldn't be able to make myself go into the dark and bring it up, because I didn't know what would be on it, and as long as I didn't develop it, it wasn't anything yet. It was just silver that hadn't been asked the question. The moment I put it in the developer, I was asking, is he in this one? And the answer would be yes or no, and either way I'd have to carry it. So I let them pile. I'd develop the ones I had to for the work, with my heart going, and I'd leave the rest in the bag for weeks. I started doing fewer jobs, then fewer. People thought I was getting lazy or old before my time or drinking, and I let them think it. The real thing was that every undeveloped holder was a held breath, and I had got to where I'd rather hold my breath than know. I'll tell you what a developing night got to be like, near the end, because you can't understand the burning otherwise. You can't understand a man choosing it until you know what the ordinary nights had turned into. You work in the dark, or near to it, a little red lamp that doesn't count as light to the film. And it's quiet, it has to be. You're alone with the trays and the smell of the developer, which is a sharp smell, a chemical sourness that gets in behind your eyes, and the only sound is the water running and your own breathing and the little slosh as you rock the tray. That used to be the best part of my work, honest truth. The most peaceful hours of my life were spent in the dark over a tray watching a picture come up. There's a thing that happens, the paper's blank and white in the developer, and then a gray ghost of the picture starts up out of nothing, the darkest parts first, and it comes, it builds, the face arrives, and it had always felt like a kind of grace to me, like the day giving itself back to you after it was gone. And after Thurmond, after the woman's shadow, that same thing became the worst part of every week. Because now I'd stand over the tray, and the gray would start up out of the white, and I'd watch the dark parts come, and I would be looking every time at the back of the frame, at the doorways, at the edges, at the shadows, to see which way they fell, watching a picture develop and praying. A grown man, a professional man, standing in the red dark begging a sheet of paper to be ordinary. And the picture would build, and I'd hold my breath the whole length of it, and most times, it would come up clean, just the people who'd been there, just the light going the right way, and I'd let the breath out, and my hands would be shaking, and I'd have to sit down. Most times it was fine. That's what nobody tells you about living scared. It's not the bad nights. It's that even the good nights cost you everything you've got, because you spent them braced for the bad one. I aged 10 years in 2, over trays of clean pictures waiting for the one that wouldn't be. And the choice came to a point, the way these things do, over one set of negatives. I had the Thurmond plates, the store, the men, him. And I had a few others by then where he'd come forward, the Porch family, the Church Street, 2 or 3 more. And I sat with them one night, and I understood that I had to do one of 2 things. I could keep them, develop them out fully, file them, maybe one day let them be seen because they were true, because they were proof of a real thing the world ought to know was real, because that had been the whole of my faith. Or I could destroy them, burn the negatives, make the proof not exist, so that it could never run in a paper, never be printed again, never go into another town the way it might have gone into that one. Bury the truth on the chance that the truth was the carrier. You see the trap. If he was nothing, a fault in the silver, a trick of a tired man's eyes, then destroying those plates was a small crime against the record, and a large crime against my whole trade, the burning of true photographs by the man who made them, the worst thing a witness can do. And if he was something, then keeping them, ever showing them, might be the carrying of him into one more place, one more church, one more family that just wouldn't be there one spring, truth or harm. And no way to know which I was choosing because the not knowing was the permanent condition. I had to act in the dark. That's the only honest way I can put it. I'm a man who spent his life working in the dark, and I had to make the biggest decision of it there too, by feel, with no light to check by. I burned them, most of them. I want to tell it exactly. I built a fire, a small one, in a stove late, and I fed the negatives in one at a time, and they don't burn the way paper does. They curl and they stink, that sharp chemical stink, and the image is the last thing to go. You can watch the men on the steps go brown and then black and then be smoke. I burned the Porch family. I burned the Church Street. I burned every one I'd found him in but one. It was a slow, ugly, plain thing to do, and I felt no relief in it, none the way you might think. I felt like a man drowning evidence. I kept thinking of the Foreman's slow hand. Do not print one. I'd gone past not printing. I was unmaking. And the whole time the doubt was right there with me at the stove saying, what if he was nothing? What if these are just photographs? What if you are a frightened fool burning your own true work and calling it mercy? And you will never ever find out, because the moment you burn them, the question's gone too. That was the worst of it. I wasn't just destroying maybe evidence of him. I was destroying the only way I'd ever have to learn whether I'd been right. I chose to never know, on purpose, to be safe, if there was a safe, and to be ignorant for certain, which there was. I never told the paper. I never told anyone, not for years and years, not till I'm sitting here with that machine of yours running, and not much time left to be a coward in. I let it be the end of my real work. I did little jobs after, weddings, storefronts, careful, tame things with the lens pointed at people who wanted to be pointed at, in towns with no river in them. And I never went back into that country, and I told myself it was over because I'd ended it. You want to know about the one I kept? Of course. course you do. That's the thing you came for, I expect, though you've been good enough not to push. There's a plate I never developed, from Thurmond, one of the extra holders from that first job, the Saints copies, the ones I made two of out of habit. I burned the developed Thurmond negatives, but there was a holder I never opened, never put in the developer, a sheet of film I exposed that August day, and have never once asked the question of. It's never been in chemistry. It's latent, is the word. The image is on it, if there's an image, locked in the silver where the light put it, and it's been there since 1929 and it has never been brought up and looked at. It's in a tin. The tin's on a shelf where I can see it from my chair. It's there now while we're talking. I could go get it. I've never developed it, in all these years. And people who've heard even a piece of this have asked me why not. Just do it. Just find out. An old man, what's left to lose? And I've never had a good answer that fits in a sentence. But I'll try to give you the real one now since you've come all this way and brought the machine. It's this. As long as I don't develop it, it's both things. There's a man in it, and there isn't. He came forward and he didn't. I was right to be afraid, and I was a fool who burned his own life's truth out of superstition. All of it's true, in the tin, in the dark, the way every undeveloped picture is every possible picture until you fix it. The minute I put it in the tray, one of them dies. Either it comes up empty, 11 men or no men or a clean stretch of company store wall, and then I know I burned my real work and frightened a town in my own mind over nothing, and I have to die a foolish, cruel old man. Or it comes up with him in it, soft, the way they always start, the hat, the jacket, the face turned a little away, and then I know it was real, all of it, and I let it loose into one town at least, and the not knowing that I've made my peace with my whole life turns into a knowing I could never put down. I don't want either of those. I'm too old to start carrying a new certain thing. The doubt I've carried so long, it's worn to fit me. A fact would be a stranger. So I keep the tin where I can see it. I don't open it. I don't throw it out either, and people ask me that too. If you won't look, why not just be rid of it? And I can't do that any more than I could develop it, because throwing it out is its own kind of answer. It's saying I've decided he's nothing and not worth the asking. And I haven't decided that. I've decided not to decide, which is the only thing I ever could decide and the thing I'll die having decided. You can turn that off now if you want. I don't have a finish for you. There isn't one. I made a choice in the dark a long time ago, and I've spent the rest of my life not looking at the only thing that could tell me whether it was the right one. And I'll tell you the truth, the last true thing I've got, which is that I think about it every single day. That tin, that held breath, that man taking all this time to walk toward the front of a picture I will never let him reach. I'm not afraid of him anymore. I'm too old. What I think about, what keeps an old man up, is the wanting to know and the not letting myself, both at once, forever. That's not a story. That's just where I live. The light in here's gone while we've been talking. I didn't notice it go. That's how it does. You're looking right at a thing and you don't see it leave.